ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Before we start today's show, I just wanted to let you know that final tickets are rapidly selling out in Hobart, Canberra, Newcastle, Brisbane, Melbourne and Sydney. And we've already had to add a heap of extra shows. So these are your last chances to come and see Sarah and me in your neck of the woods. We'd love to have you there. Leah Purcell is a Kua, Gungari and Waka Waka woman. When young Leah was growing up, she wasn't sure what she wanted to do with her life. The options for her at the time were to become a nurse or work in the local meatworks. Leah's first job was in the meatworks in the small Queensland town of Murgon. But her boss at the time told her she couldn't have a permanent position because he'd seen her in the high school musical. He told Leah she could be something more. And Leah drove off from Murgon at high speed one day. She made a new life in the big smoke, in Brisbane and in Sydney. She decided to follow her talents all at once. She became a singer, a playwright, and later a director, an actor and a producer, and a filmmaker. Leah has starred in some of Australia's most loved films, TV and theatre productions, such as Lantana and The Proposition, Police Rescue and Wentworth. Leah has also starred in and created and written and produced and directed some of the finest works in the First Nations canon, such as Box the Pony, Brand New Day, Black Chicks Talking and The Drover's Wife. I spoke with Leah about her life story and I asked her first about her family and the town of Cherbourg.
Yeah, Cherbourg was founded in 1904. It was a government experiment to see if they could put as many blackfellas in the one area, fence them off and tell them to fend for themselves. Well, it didn't quite work. It lasted for about 6 months. So it was part of that stolen generations. They were shipped off to missions. When the government realised that it failed in what they thought would work, that's when the missionaries came through and the churches took over and helped to run. So my grandmother was stolen in around about 1910 and she was taken to Cherbourg with her sister.
How old would she have been then?
Look, we couldn't find a birth certificate for her, but to have those memories, we're saying she might have been around about 5, and through the years of doing research, we looked at she might have been 5, her sister might have been 3 or 4, and there was a younger brother. And the beauty out of this story, when I fought so hard and long to try to find something, is that her white dad actually tried to save the 3 of them, because I went back out to Mitchell and they were put on a train, so they must have been the cattle carts, they said, and the railway lines takes this really sharp right turn off the platform, and apparently word had got back to him. He worked at a Forest Vale station, and he got on his horse and rode to town, and he managed to get his boy out of the carriage, but the 2 girls was in the front one, so he had to jump out to be able to stay on the platform, and they left, and they never ever saw them again. And then my grandmother and her sister even sort of got split up for a little while, and then they found each other back at Cherbourg, where my grandmother was very fortunate enough to have other Gungari people, so tribal people from the same tribe that lived in the mission area. Otherwise, she would have ended up in the dormitory system. So someone came down and claimed her and said, "We'll look after her." So she was slightly lucky in the sense that she actually could go to family and wasn't put in the dormitory system.
Yeah, because so often with those cases, families went looking for each other for decades after that.
Yeah. My grandmother finally met her brother. She might have been 72 and he was around about 68, 69, and he just rocked up on the doorstep. We opened the door and there was this male version of our nan, and he said, "I'm here to see my sister." And my grandmother was crippled with arthritis and Parkinson's disease, so she couldn't speak very well. But I was this 7-year-old little girl. It was a hot summer morning, and I remember just sitting in the room, looking at him, back at her, going, "Wow, you guys could be twins," and going, "Wow, this is my nan's." And she would tell me, as a little 5-year-old kid, she would tell me about the horses, the sound of the horses coming, and that's what they told them all to run. And being 5...
If you hear the horses coming, you run.
Yeah, the horses' hooves, you run because they're coming. And so the kids would scatter. And so they were rounded up. And I'm not sure how they actually got into town because they were like 60 clicks out. So it was harrowing to go back over the research, but it was so empowering. And you've got to know this knowledge. And it just makes me thrive and determined to do all that I can to bring about understanding through my work.
So, Lee, you were brought up in the town of Murgon, like I said, which is nearby. It's quite close to Cherbourg, isn't it? Where do you fit into the family lineup? Yeah,
well, I'm number 7 of 7 kids. Good number 7. My mum was from a family of 7 girls. My mum was born in Cherbourg, and they left Cherbourg when my mum was about 15. So my grandfather got work for a white family that were quite prominent in the town. There was a lot of upheaval, of course, when the mission did first arrive there. There was only about 5 other families, Aboriginal families, that are actually in the township of Murgon, and they were allowed on the other side of the railway tracks.
Literally on the other side of the tracks, right.
Yeah. So we kind of got racism from both sides. We weren't black enough to be black and we weren't white enough to be white. So we copped it from both sides, and there was still a lot of animosity through the years that we were the accepted blacks in the township of Murgon from other members in Cherbourg. But like a lot of our extended family is still there. I still go home. It's all fine now. But that mentality back in those days, you're either with us or you're against us. But my grandfather was just trying to, he had 7 daughters to look after. And he was considered a good black on his papers, wasn't a drinker, didn't socialise. But of course they did. We'd sneak out, he'd go see his brother. But the superintendent that ran the mission did not leave until 1975. So I was 5 years old, and we still had to seek permission to go out and see my grandfather's brothers and cousins.
Yeah, it's a kind of apartheid pastoral system, wasn't it?
Yeah. But look, my mum was great. She was a proud black woman, but then when I saw her in white circles, she became the Mayol with her head down, and I'd always wonder, like, what's this all about? As a little kid growing up, she'd have this persona and then put on another. But my mum was doing reconciliation before the word became fashionable or political. There was always black and white people in our kitchen. It might have been around a carton of Forex, but they all shared it. My mum was this tiny little woman that just had so much power. Everyone called her Auntie Flo or Mrs. P, and they did as they were told. She was the first Aboriginal woman that was allowed in the lounge area of a bar. So if anyone came with Auntie Flo, they were right. They'd do as they're told. But otherwise, the blackfellas had to drink at the front bar. We weren't allowed in, or you have to go to the side window to buy your alcohol. So
she was a very recognised figure in the town then?
Yeah, she was. My grandfather was very looked up to, and considered a good man, both black and white. And then my mum just had this, everyone loved her. Like the town stopped when her hearse drove through Murgon, and that was very rare when she passed away. So she was very well looked up to and was doing her bit.
So, Leah, as the youngest of 7, who was in the house with you growing up? Was it just you and your mum, was it?
Yeah, it was. I'm quite younger than the first 6, so there's 12 years between me and the youngest of the first 6, and they had all sort of left home. And so basically I grew up as a only child, but more so with my nephews and nieces. I'm around their age group. So I grew up around them, and it was just me and my mum, and of course my mum's mother, my grandmother, Nana, Daisy, who was crippled with arthritis and Parkinson's disease. My mum looked after her for 27 years, raised 7 children, 2 nephews and 2 white boys that wouldn't go home. There was always a revolving front door. She was my mother, she was my father, she was my hero, And through life, she didn't have an easy life. I call her, my grandmother was from the era where they were considered subhumans. My mother was the oppressed, where she didn't have a voice. So seeing her, and what she did was, I guess, drowned her sorrows. She had a husband. My father was white. He had a wife and another family. So I could see as a woman her needs weren't met in love and relationships. She had the burden and the task of raising all these children. So I could see why she also relied on the bottle for her release. Alcoholism comes in all sorts of form. I'd call it alcoholism because she was very much a binge drinker. When she did drink, she could drink for days. But I would never change anything the way I was brought up, because it was my responsibility. I was the youngest. I was there to look after her. I was there to understand her.
So it was your job to take her home from the pub?
Yeah, I'd walk her home and get her into bed when she would. And, I was a little girl doing, 10-year-old doing adult decisions. I'd go home and feed my nan, get up and fry her some eggs. I'd get up on the table and flip the eggs, and then I'd stuff it all up with a new bottle of tomato sauce. You hit it on the bum of the bottle and it all goes splat.
Everywhere.
And then I have to, so I was very much doing adult responsibilities at the age of 10 and staying up rather late, and then my schoolwork suffered,
So in looking after your mum, how was your mum when you got her home?
Look, she was a bit of a ratbag. She never went to bed because she loved her music. So she'd crank up the little record player that we had. Actually, we had quite a fancy U-Butte one because she did have a massive record pile. So when she did have a few bob spare, she'd buy a record,
She'd put on a stack of 45s.
Oh, 45s,
Right.
She'd open up all the windows and I'd be going around closing it, turning up.
And what would you be listening to? What would she be playing?
Roy Orbison, Elvis Presley, Jimmy Reeves, Charlie Pride.
Crying music.
Yeah, mate. She'd have a good howl and then I'd come out and go, Mum, can you please go to bed? I've got to get up for school. And it was beautiful. She'd sit me on her lap and she'd have a cry. It was the only time I ever saw her cry was when she was a little bit intoxicated, and she said to me, without you, Bub, I'd be in the gutter. And that to me was my words that I was here to look after her. She had me when she was 42. She wasn't expected to live. I was always said that I was someone else's child, another sister's child. So when she said that to me, I said, I'm here. My purpose of being born is here to look after you. So I never judged her, and I never will, and I never have.
Leah, did your dad acknowledge you? You said he had another family. Did he acknowledge you as his daughter?
Not until I was 32. And I went back to him and sort of said, come on, old man. We had a love-hate relationship. He'd come and visit, and I didn't like him because he was this guy that just rocked up and then he'd leave.
Would he privately acknowledge you as his daughter?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
Right.
Privately
Just
in the
not to the
house.
town.
Not to the town or and we weren't, it was a big secret. We weren't allowed to call him Dad, and it was always Mr. Hack. But when he did live in town, or when he did come back to work in the butcher shop with the people that my mum used to work for, the Angels, I'd go on a Friday night when we'd head up to the pub and stand at the back of the butcher shop, and he'd give me a wink and I'd give him a wink, and I'd wait till everyone leaves and he'd give me they cooked their own chook pieces, and that was my dinner from Dad. So he did give me $20 once, and every second Friday a bit of a chook, a drumstick, and they were bloody good drumsticks too. So we had this weird relationship, but it wasn't until later when I went on the Andrew Denton show, and he put it on me. He said, "Have you ever told your father you loved him?" And I said, "I don't know if I do." And it got me thinking. And then by the end of the year, I actually went up and to see him and to just go, what's going on? We need to talk. So I put him in the car and took him for a drive, and we went out to the cemetery, and he was looking for his mum and dad's grave. So he said, let's start there. And I said, yeah, why not? And he couldn't find them. And there was this dear old elderly lady around his side said, oh, Les, you're back. And he said, yes, I am. And your mother and father's buried down there. And then he goes, and who's this lovely lady? And I looked at him and he looked at me and he said, it's my daughter. And he took off that way and I went, but you don't know me. And I took off in the other direction. It was classic. But I walked away with this massive smile on my face. You don't realise that you do need that acknowledgement from your parents, and at 32 I'm going, okay, I'm his.
Why do you think he took off? It wasn't. I get the feeling it was he wasn't ready for the emotional
probably
consequences of
yes,
that.
Yeah, I think so, and that's why I took off in the other direction.
You were frightened of it.
Yeah, of like, holy moly, we're going to have to look each other in the eye and just take this the next step.
Could you say it? I love you to
it
him?
Wasn't at that stage. It was probably 5 years later where I went back and I said, oh man, I love you. And he couldn't respond, but it took me forever. I drove the car into the yard, deliberately turned around the big Hills hoist at the back of the yard, and I'm driving out slow and he's just waving at the gate, waiting to close it. And I get out and I stop and I start and I get out of the car and I went, Dad, I love you. And he turned around and I jumped into the car and I headed back to Brisbane, cried all the way to Blackbutt, It gave me peace. And and then from there on, me and the old man, we would share stories, and we had a special understanding. There was two things that he said to me. He said, I wish all my daughters were like you, to the other sisters. And then he said, we're very competitive in the family. And then he turned around and, through all my work that I'd done, he said, all the power to you. And it was the one compliment my father gave me in my life. And you feed off that, you do.
How important was storytelling in your family? Like, I don't already know the answer to this question, Leah.
Massive. I think I'm one of the last generations to have the privilege to sit around the feet of my elders, people looking in the eye, telling you a yarn that could go for hours or for seconds. It was so ingrained in me, and it gave me my foundation to be where I am today. I truly believe that. Yes, it might have been around a carton of Forex and, but the singing was amazing. The storytelling was amazing. I had an uncle and aunt that would put Whoopi Goldberg to shame in delivering a punchline. They were just so funny, and they drank tea, and then my mother would sing, and her gig was putting bottle tops on her toes and tap dancing. Then I had another
wow.
Yeah, then I had another auntie who played the guitar, taught herself, who would get up on stage with Slim Dusty, and sing her music. And so it was just amazing, these stories and just the attention that people gave. And there was good times and sad times, but you had everyone's undivided attention.
So there's not just a culture of storytelling, there's a culture of listening as well.
Yes, that's exactly my master's degree right there with them. And they did teach me to listen, because one of the best compliments I ever got was when we were doing Lantana, and Vince Colosimo turned around and said to me and Anthony LaPaglia, "Thank you for listening." Oh. And I went, yeah, that's the magic of acting, when you listen. And I got that from being a little girl, because it was always 4 a.m. or 3 a.m, and I'd be outside the kitchen door and they go, "You're supposed to be in bed." I go, "Yeah, I know." And they go, "Oh, in you come." And, the party would start when I got there, and then I'd just listen, and I was absorbed, and I'm so grateful. I think I got my old man's memory, because he could recall a story. And I just took all this in, and it's all come to fruition with my stories now, with what I'm doing,
So tell me about this story you wrote about your neighbours at school that was a kind of a transformative moment for you, Leah.
Yeah, it was. It was the Murgon Lions Rotary Club's competition, and then it went on to the South Burnett Lions Rotary Club for the big area, was Kingaroy, Wondai, Gameri, Kilkeven. And
the big leagues.
The big leagues. And look, as I said, growing up the way I did, school wasn't a priority. I was often very tired. I handed in my homework when I could. I went for a nap in the sleeping sick room. I said, "I'll get back to you after a little lunch." So it wasn't my favourite subject. And as I said before, I was a kid that was making adult decisions. So when I was spoken to as a child, I went, "Hang on a minute, sweetheart. I just put my mother to bed and fed my grandmother, and you're going to talk to me like that?" Cut that long story short. There was a writing competition came up, and I knew I loved, whenever I had to get up and stand up in class and do anything, if I could recite it, or if I could tell a yarn, I knew I'd be good. I'd get an A somewhere. So the teacher, this competition, I wrote it. She filled it in. We handed it back, and there was red everywhere. And down the bottom it had, "Come see me." And I said, "I'm in trouble."
What red? What do you mean?
Red biro.
Right, red
mistakes.
Biro,
Capital letters,
right.
commas, full stops. So I went, "I'm in trouble." So I went up after school hours and I threw it on the table. I said, "Sorry, miss." She said, "What are you sorry for?" I said, "Well, look at all the red. I owe you a red pen, with all that." and I said, "So, I'm really sorry." She goes, "No, you don't have to be sorry." She goes, "The reason I want to see you is because this is a really good story." And I went, "Oh." I said, "But what about all the red, all about the mistakes?" She goes, "I can help you with that. If you want to develop this and put this into the competition, I think it's good enough."
Oh, bless her. What a lovely thing to do.
Yeah, the next morning I was there at 8:30, the first time in 7 years of school that I was on time and ready to go. And whilst we were rewriting and working on that, I was the most studious school. I was putting myself to bed early. I'm going, "No, we're not going to the pub. I've got to go to school tomorrow." And then I won the local, and then I went on to win the South Burnett and won certificates and, a beautiful silver pen. And for a split second I went, okay, I can be good at something, And, you just tuck that away. And it wasn't until later when I did start writing something, or maybe with Box the Pony, I guess, someone said something. I said, "Oh, I don't know. No, I never wanted to be a writer." And they went, "Oh, hang on a minute.
Maybe
I
you
actually
did."
won, and I was always the kid with the wild imagination, because I'd tell some of our cultural stories and the teacher would go, "Sit down. There's no such thing as a mundagara that lives in that water." And yet later in life, when I went back and did research, there was absolutely dreaming stories. But I just was a little girl and I couldn't grasp the more pronounced story that an uncle may have told, but I was having a go.
Were you acting in school productions at the time?
Not so much in primary school, but that's what I was good at in high school. I was 9 years old, and my sister-in-law, Deborah, she's like a second mum to me, she took me to see her sister in the Murgon High School musicals, and we did shit hot musicals.
Yeah, what were you doing?
Well, she was doing Seven Brides
for Seven Brothers.
And I was 9 years old and I sat there and I went, this is what I want to do.
The seventh daughter of a seventh daughter too.
Yes.
Watching Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Yes. And I just went and I said, I've got to do this. So I was really anxious to get to high school because I had my netball for 6 months. And then 3 months after that, I had this short course of the music theatre. So I actually kind of wanted to be at school for the first 9 months of school. So the first production we did was King and I was the lead dancer. And in those days we'd have Saturday rehearsals and the teacher would be there smoking. She goes, Leah, take them outside and don't bring them back until they know what they're doing. I go, yes, miss. So I had responsibilities of choreographer and assistant director. And then from there, in year 9, I kicked myself because I was at the crossroads of being a mongrel kid or a good girl, and I refused to go in it. But they kept it apart for me right up till 2 weeks out because they said, "Come on, Leah, come on." But I was such at a crossroad and just being I was a little wanker, and I just said, I'll sort myself out. So I missed that production. But then I was the first junior in year 10 to get lines because you had to work your way up to the leads. So only the seniors got the leads or talking roles. But I was the first junior in Bye Bye Birdie. I was the sexy secretary Gloria.
Right.
And I actually had a bit of a dance routine where I was dancing for him, and it was my first laugh. And I went down into the splits and I had to get stuck. And so the first night, I actually popped my hamstring warming up in the back, like I ripped it. So I flipped legs, kept myself warm, went out, did the scene, did it, and then I did my first pretend I couldn't get up, and this little ripple of laughter. And I went, oh my gosh. So I did something else and I looked at them this time and then the laughter grew and I looked back to the other kids and I went, this is amazing. And mate, I went. So something that was only supposed to last for 5 seconds, I think probably lasted 3 minutes and I just milked the crowd and mate, I was away.
So once you left school, you told your mum you wanted to be a nurse to keep her happy. What kind of nurse did you have in mind?
A theatre nurse.
Did you know what a theatre nurse was?
No, I thought I'd be doing Doris Day, can kicks, sewing someone up in a theatre. Because my mum asked me when I was 9, she goes, what do you want to be? The usual question. And I said, I want to dance. Everyone wanted to dance. I want to perform. She said, look, bub, you're black, you're a woman, you're from the bush. It's probably not going to happen. She said, you can either work at the meatworks or you can be a nurse, which because there was 2 nurses in the family. My sister became a matron and ran a hospital. So my mother could see that could happen.
So you thought, Theatre
nurse kept them off my back until I was around about 14, 15 again.
And were you devastated when you found out there was no theatre other than an operating theatre in being a theatre nurse? Yeah,
when I finally, when computers and encyclopedias came through and someone said, you do know that there's no music, you won't be singing to anyone. I went, okay.
So what happened then when you fronted up at the meatworks and met the foreman there?
Yeah, well, through the high school musicals, the town obviously came and supported it, and I was becoming a senior 11. I started directing and working and choreographing. And then so on the holidays, my mother said, if you want money, because she was on a sole parent pension, she goes, you're going to have to go out and get a holiday work. And my sister said, yeah, I'll put you on, because she was a foreman out there. So they made you wait, and then the big foreman would come up and look around. And then the morning he took me on, of course, everyone knew me. I grew up in pubs, so I knew half of the blokes. So I got a bit of initiation. I won't go into it. It's a bit gory, going through the kill floor and
blood and guts and everything.
Yeah, going to get the white coat and the shoes, and then. So I did the first week, and then the second week he calls me up and I said, oh, shit, I'm in trouble, because I buggered up a box one day. And I said, oh, I'm in trouble. So I walked in and he said, look, Leah, you're a good worker. I can see that. He goes, but don't ever come to me looking for a job. And I go, I beg your pardon? I said, this is the only industry we have in Murgon. I said, so where am I going to go, mate? He said, I saw you in the high school musicals and you were bloody good, and I'm not going to give you a job here. And I went, okay then. So I went, all right. But the funny thing was I actually walked out with a spring in my step. It was a stranger once again, telling me that I was good at something, and it just kept a little bit of life. I actually walked away smiling, going, maybe I can have the dream of being a performer. But I just put that away, just put that positive thought back in the head. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but just this, my positivity was growing. People in the town would stop me and ask for my autograph, and I go, oh, okay, I only did a musical. And, but it was those little things where you walk away, and I did feel like I was 6 foot and bulletproof, but I just stored it away and allowed that to build up for when the day that I did decide to leave. I said, someone out there other than my family were the hardest critics, really. I said, has believed in my ability, and maybe I can do this.
So you became a mum You gave birth to your daughter when you were 18 years old. Was your mum around to see her?
Just. I was pregnant when I was 17. I turned 18 in August. My daughter was born in September. My mother died in October. Oh. We found out that she had bowel cancer when I was about 4 months pregnant, and she was only given 4 months to live, but she hung around for about another 5 months, I think, just to see my daughter being born, the baby being born, and see if I was okay. And then, I'd take her in and we allowed her to, do the old wives' tale of the belly button and, putting a rag around it and knotting it off and doing stuff like that. And then I think she finally saw that I was capable of looking after it. And then she said, I think it's time to die. And me and my other sister was looking after her. And we said, yep, you've said goodbye to everyone, because she said, take the kids away. So she managed to say goodbye to the grandchildren and everyone, because they went down to Hervey Bay. And then she said, it's a good time to say goodbye. So we went, off you go.
You said in the past that her death liberated you in some way. How did it liberate you?
She set me free to pursue my dreams, because if she was still alive today, mate, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be probably still in Murgon or wherever she wanted to be, to look after her. It's my job. I was the youngest, and what the stuff that she used to say to me when I was growing up, my responsibility was my mum. So when she died, I went, if I don't do something, then I'm not justifying her death, because she died at 60. It was far too young. Her life was just starting, So I said, she's my motivation and my determination to do something. And I hung around Murgon for about a year. I wasn't doing well. I did what she done and started to drown my sorrows in a bottle of vodka, 750 every Wednesday, and then I'd look at my baby and I said, this isn't right. I've been here. I don't want her to know the inside of a pub. And I'm proud to say she doesn't, and we never did. And then I pulled back on my drinking, so that I went, no, there's more to life than this. And I've got to find a way to find happiness and determination to succeed. I had no idea how I was going to be an actor. There was times where I felt about committing suicide. Is it easier to leave this world? But it was my daughter's laughter that kept me going, because I said, if I die and she lived, who's going to look at, who's going to understand her? Because that was my thing with my mum, because she had me at such an older age. I thought, if she dies, who's going to understand me? Not so much look after me, because I could look after myself. Who's going to understand me? So she kept me going. And just having the guts to go, enough is enough. I was in an abusive relationship, and I jumped in my little yellow Datsun Sunny 1970 with a Japanese racing car engine, and took off for Brisbane. And just landed on my feet and said, I've got to do this,
Tell me how you met your partner, Bain, at this time, please.
Yeah, well, I said to myself, I just want to take a year off and find me again.
After an abusive relationship?
My mum had passed away, growing up in a small country town, racism from both sides. So I just wanted to find who I was, because I'd lost myself a little bit. I was drowning in a bottle of vodka, And so I got back into my netball, got back into my sport, stopped the drink, and then I started dreaming of this guy.
Dreaming of a guy?
Dreaming of a guy. I could,
it's like the Brady Bunch song in reverse, isn't it?
Yeah. And I couldn't see his face, but I could see his shape, and there was these 5 children around us, and they're all different colours, and I could see my daughter there and different ages. And then my cousin worked for his cousin. And when I said, okay, I'm going to go back out into the workforce, so I went to, it was an Aboriginal agency, ATSIC at the time, and saying, my cousin worked there. And at that time they were supporting Indigenous entrepreneurial, building their own businesses. And Bain was running the first Aboriginal martial arts centre. And I sort of said, I did a little bit of aerobics, study in the Murgon YMCA and correspondence. And I thought, I could do that. And then my cousin said, "Are you looking for a secretary?" And I said, "Look, I can't spell." I said, "I'm no good as a secretary, but I can do my aerobics and I'm a good dancer." So then we sort of met, and then we found out that he sort of knew my older sisters. Bain's 9 years older than me, so he knew the family. So, and I remember him when I was 9 years old. Me and my nephew stole his piggy bank and went up and played Space Invaders with his 20 cents. And I told him that after we were together for about 5 years, and he said, "I knew that little mongrel stole the piggy bank." And
to play Space Invaders.
Yeah, up at the local shop, and we played. My hands were that sore because we were trying to get rid of the money. Because he come up and said to my sister, "I think Darren stole my piggy bank." So I said, "I'm giving up." And then we sort of went on a blind date. So we sort of were talking over the phone because it was about work, whether I was going to be his secretary. And I said, look, I'm more interested in being, actually I come from a boxing family and we shared that in common. He had a white dad and a black mum, but he grew up with his white dad as well. I grew up with my black mum. So we brought things that we didn't have. He had connection to his black family on Stradbroke Island, but his mum was away. So we were the yin and yang, and we sort of brought things to each other. And as I say, the rest's history. So, yeah, and we just connected. And I think it was through our love of sport, our parents' similarities, upbringings. And then when we sort of was together and we were talking about stuff, he goes, oh, gosh, yeah, I remember you with Little and the blue teddy bear and my piggy bank. I said, yeah, we did take it.
and the high score on the Space Invaders as a result
yes.
of that. You wrote a song. You were starting writing your own songs at this time, and you wrote a song about your grandmother called "Run, Daisy, Run." What was that song about?
Yeah,
there?
well, it was Bain that actually encouraged me to get into my music. He'd hear me singing in the shower, and I said, "Look, mate, you're just in love with me. I already told you I loved you. You won me over." And he goes, "No, seriously, you've got a great voice." And I got into a 8-week workshop, and they were all my uncles and cousins, and I wasn't going to go because I know them all, but it was run very professionally, and it was amazing to be able to. Because they were entertaining me when I was a little girl. It was great to be able to entertain them and pick up from their skills. And it opened up the floodgates to writing songs, and all of a sudden I started writing. But there was this one night, Bain was working at the Dundalli House, which was a drop-in centre for young Aboriginal boys. So I was just home alone, my daughter was in bed, and this song came to me, and the tune was there, the lyrics just flew. It took me 10 minutes. It was just before midnight, and there was only one word I ever changed, and it was and. I think it was but, and I changed it to an and or something.
So just bang.
It just
like
came.
That.
And lucky Bain had bought me a little recorder thing, so I recorded it. And I played it to him when he came home, and I said, this just came out of me, because I didn't even write it in pen or paper. I just started singing.
Oh, you just sang it, right?
I just started singing, and I was thinking about my nan, and I was gone, and I sort of didn't write it down, just had it on this microphone because you'd walk around singing things, and he went, oh, wow, this is amazing. And then the first time I sung for the family, when I told him about it, was at a barbecue. And I stood in the corner in the garage facing the corner, and they were all behind me, so I had my back to them because I was afraid. And when I turned around, it was really quiet, and I went, oh, gosh, they hate it. And they're all standing there crying because, of course, I'm singing about their mother and their grandmother, and they went, that was amazing. And then I had an opportunity through a play that I was doing for Street Arts. That was in 91, my first professional gig, and I gave that song as part of a collection of stories that we'd done. And then that song got me heard by Michael Leslie, and that was when Brand New Day, the third production of that, where we did a national tour. Sort of through that song, people said, you got to listen to this girl and listen to that. And then come to Sydney, and when all the reconciliation, the stolen generation all became political and land rights, and I joined the movement with Auntie Lowacha O'Donoghue, Noel Pearson, Aidan Ridgway, when we go around and we were talking, they were talking the political agenda of what land rights was, what it meant. And then at the end of it all, I'd just come up and sing that song. And it absolutely turned these hardcore men that were adamant that, they're going to lose everything and this is going to happen and blacks shouldn't have this. And then I'd sing, and I said, look, all I want to say is this song. This is my grandmother's story, and you can't deny me this story, because to deny it means she doesn't exist. And I heard these stories when I was a little girl, and that's what I'd do. And then I'd have guys coming up to me, wiping tears, going, thanks. I might not be for the cause, but at least I got an understanding. And that's when I knew that my work, I don't want to educate people, I don't want to try to change people's minds, it's up to them, but at least I can give that emotional, heartfelt side to the Indigenous cause, which is always a political, it's always got a political tag on it. So I said, all I want to do is bring an understanding. What you do with that is absolutely up to you.
How did you create Box the Pony? How did that come about?
Well, it was Rhoda Roberts was producing the Festival of the Dreaming. I think it was the only blackfella in Sydney that didn't have a job, because everyone else was employed and was going to be in a show, and I hadn't performed down here yet. So I'd moved down to do Galaxy Pay TV. I was the first video jockey.
Were you?
Yes, as Leah's Soul Kitchen on Red.
Really?
Yeah.
So were you one of those hip young people going, g'day, how's it going?
Yeah, I was, that
right?
kind of thing in front of the, and,
check
you
it
know,
out.
check it out, check this top 10.
Yeah.
But my story that I got on, because they said, tell us a story about your thing. So I told them about when I went shopping in Super Value in Murgon, and I was breastfeeding my daughter. It was my first outing in 3 months, and I had this dress that you'd pull across so your breast was there. So I forgot to pull it back. My breast was in the bra, nothing was too exposed, but I was walking around the shopping centre with my left boob hanging out, you know, and I told them that story, and they just cracked up. And, you know, he was this 25-year-old mother with dreadlocks and a nose ring, and I get a gig on Galaxy Pay TV.
So you created this play about, and this is your story, your mother's story, and your grandmother's story?
Yeah, and it was through Rhoda, with being the producer of that. I met her, she knew my story, and then I said, Rhoda, I'll clean a toilet for you. You know, I just want to work in this festival. And she said, well, you tell a good yarn. Why don't you go and write it? And I said, mate, I failed English, C average on the best of days. And she said, well, just go away. She goes, don't worry about that, and go away and write some stuff down. So I sort of did. I just started going through my childhood and memories. And then when I got to, I said, look, Rhoda, I'm going to be the first person to say this is the first, I'm not a writer. I don't know how to do this. I said, I know how to tell a yarn. And I said, so we need to get someone in that I can learn from. And we auditioned writers. We chose someone that I felt comfortable with, that I felt could give a different angle on it as well. And then we sat down for about 8 weeks, 3 times a week, 6 hours a day for 3 days a week, and just orally giving my story. And such a black traditional thing to do, because we were oral givers, you know, in the sense of storytelling. And it was that process where I did spill, and it was just remembering my uncle, how he told the story, how my aunt told the story, how my mother told the story, and me finding the way Leah Purcell tells a story. And then from that, we went through and structured something. I said, I don't want this to be a therapy lesson. I said, I want it to be bloody good theatre, because 99.9 of my audience members are going to be non-Indigenous. And I said, don't tell me I'm going to educate, because I'd run a mile. Don't tell me the issues that I should cross, because I can't do that. But I'm going to tell you the story of my grandmother. I'm going to tell you the story of my mother. I'm going to tell you the story of me. I'm going to tell you the story that I'm trying to start the journey for my daughter, to make a change and a difference, and to be a strong black woman who is in the prime where she has a voice and she can make a change and a difference.
Leah, what was it like for you to be your mother and be your grandmother on stage night after night? Did it ever feel eerie, or did it just always feel very natural to you to do that?
It did feel very natural, because I was a mimic. I loved to mimic things, because I'd mimic Barbara Streisand, Liza Minnelli, Doris Day when I was little. So to mimic, but there was beautiful spiritual moments every now and then. I don't know, you can't describe it, but you sort of get lost in the play, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, it's over. What just happened? You know, and there was only a couple of times you're ever very privileged to experience this out-of-body thing, or you're not even out of your body, you're just gone, you're lost in the story. And there was a beautiful night after the out-of-town tryout with 60 of my mother's sisters and sister cousins sitting in the front row.
Oh my God.
That was beautiful, to draw the line as where the actor had to step up. So that was the best lesson that I could have got. And they were lit, because the theatre was steep, so they just was constantly in light. And that's when the actor had to step forward. I had to draw a line, because there was one aunt that was crying from the very get-go. Yeah. And if I didn't put the professional on, there's no way I could have gotten through the show. So then we proved ourselves, got the blessings, got permission to move forward. The director nearly fell over when I turned around. He said, Leah, what if they don't like it? I said, well, we don't do it. He said, you do realise that there's been thousands of dollars? I said, mate, I'll go walkabout. No one can find me. You know, if they say no, I just can't do it. This blackfellow away, you know. So he was scratching his head. I said, anyway, I've got to go out now and perform. So off I went. But the best one was when we did the Cremorne Theatre. So we get, you know, producers in Brisbane. Right. Producers are behind it now. Queensland's come on board, bringing their daughter home. And bugger me dead, I go up to Johnny Kotsis and I said, mate, I need some tickets for my family. He said, yeah, righto, mate, how many do you need? I said, 253. And he went, you're joking? I said, no, I'm quite serious.
You weren't joking?
I wasn't joking. So we did a special family night. Now, that night was amazing, because I said to the director, I said, I don't know what's going to happen when I go out there and I become my mum. And, mate, that show was about an hour 10. I think it went for an hour and a half that night, because as soon as I became a mother, I don't remember, and there was this call and response, and Oh, it was
What do you
just-
mean, call and response?
Well, like her nephews and her brother cousins that were sitting in the audience, they'd have this call. When they'd come into the pub, my mum would sing it because she was so short and everyone would be tall. My mum would sing it, hip, hip. And then where the family was, hip, hip, Jackson. And then she'd know where to go. So there was all this call and response and just... They were so far ahead of me with the jokes. Like, they'd laugh before I'd get there, and I go, can I finish the play? It was just so amazing. Like, it was an experience that I don't know if anyone else could really experience when you're doing your story. And, the harrowing moments, it got so quiet and I was so scared to go there, but I also knew the love, and this story had to be told. This was my dreaming. I'm giving back what they gave to me, and it was just the best night, and it taught me so much too as an actor, because I hadn't learned anything but to wait for an audience, to play off an energy of an audience. It was just amazing to have that. And I said they'll either kiss me or hit me, and they all kissed me. It was good.
So that's terrifying to do that in front of a bunch of people who knew the stuff that you were talking about. But it's also terrifying to do it in front of an audience that has no investment in you or your family or the story to begin with in any case. So what was it like when you brought it to the stage of the Sydney Opera House, Leah?
I was petrified. I didn't have no previews. Opening night was opening night. We had 9 months to put that show together. It was like giving birth all over again. The craziness that you go through, didn't like first drafts, throwing stuff out windows and throwing chairs around and carrying on poor Bane, picking it all up, going, no, we'll talk through it. So then we get there to opening night, and before I went on stage, we were doing warm-ups, and I said to my director was there, I said, I just want you to sit there and just breathe with me. And I turned around and said to him, I said, I feel like I'm big noting, because that's what we said in the bush. You're a big noter, got a mouth, I'm big noting. And I said, I'm 27 years old. What right do I have to be on this grand stage in this grand house telling my little story? And he scratched his head and he had to think for a bit, and he turned around and he said, well, you give face to all those faded images of those Aboriginal children from the stolen generations that was caught in missions, that massacres. He said, you're giving them a voice. You're giving them a chance to be heard. All I want you to do is get up there and do your best. But I don't do anything for me. I do it for my mother. He said, do it for your mother, do it for your grandmother, do it for your daughter. And then I said, yeah, I can do that. So, called to stage, petrified. My first performance in Sydney, and as nervous as buckery, and my stage manager said, okay, this is your call. And I said, I'll either see you in 10 seconds or I'll see you in an hour and 10. She said, how about an hour and 10? And shoved me on, because I kind of couldn't move. And then away we went. And mate, I thought I was going crazy. There was 5 voices in my head, as well as going through the motion of this. I'd get my first laugh and this voice went, oh, that's great. I went, shut up. And, this other voice went, yeah, she needs to focus. I went, yeah, I do. You shut up. So I'm trying to get this show up, and I went like a bloody rattle, train, express, just boom. And I felt this energy. And what I pride in myself is I do feel my audience's energy. And that's why...
You can read a room.
I can read a room. And I went, okay, they're a bit uptight here. So, and then the best way to start a play is to beat a bag, because your adrenaline's taken out on the heavy bag.
So you're punching a punching bag.
Punching a punching bag. Right. Beautiful old, top light coming down like we're in an old boxing shed where my father used to train us, and I remember the lights would spill out, and it was just brilliant to just let rip, and I went, here we go. So I got rid of my nervous tension, could focus on my breathing, and I knew I needed to give the audience some time, because they're all sitting upright, they're waiting for me to turn around and hit them. And the first line in the play, I stop and I give them this big cheesy grin, and I go, g'day. And you could have all, they all fell over, you could feel them going, oh my God, she hasn't sworn us, or she, we didn't have to say sorry yet, and you could feel them sort of loosening up and sitting forward, and did a few jokes where I was taking the willies out of myself and my family and who I was. And then, mate, by the end of that first section, I knew it was like if you were watching an out-of-body experience. I put my hand out and I said, just come with me. Just come with me, and you're going to go on this wild ride, and I'm going to make you laugh, I'm going to make you cry, I'm going to shut you up, and I'm going to make you think. And that's, as an actor, that's all I want to do in all of my writing. I want my audiences to be silenced. I want them not to be walking out wondering where they're going to go and get their coffee from, or, okay, let's talk about the weather. I want them to be stunned, because that's what you want theatre to do to you.
You've since, like I said, taken The Drover's Wife, the classic Henry Lawson story, and turned that into a stage production, and a novel as well. It's won awards. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's great. That was a story you had as a girl, was it?
Yeah, my mum had the book, a little book with his short stories. It was first published in 1892.
Yeah, I had that as a kid too. My dad used to read to me like The Loaded Dog and stories like that from it.
Yeah. And our favourite, I don't know what, because my mum passed away before I could, at that age where you ask those questions, but I've still got the book, I've kept it. But I know there's evidence how old I was when I was introduced to the story, because it was grade 1, because I had Nip, Dora, Fluff, 1 + 1 = 3 in the margin. And I remember my mum saying, don't write on the words. If you have to write in it, write on the spare bits. And I tried to draw the drover's hut and all of that. And I remember having it marked and why I love that story, and I'm not sure why my mum loved it, but I think if I can speak for her or, get into her mind, it's because it was her life in a little way. She raised, the drover's wife had 5 kids.
Yeah, just the story, So it's the drover's wife. He's gone off to be a drover. She's at home alone.
Yep, in a shanty with 5 kids, and a black snake comes in. It's coming into winter, and the snake, or it's the dead of winter, and the snakes come inside because it's hungry, trying to hibernate, and it goes under the bed. And so she gets all her kids. There's only a 2-room shanty. She puts all the kids up on the kitchen table, and while she's sitting there, she's reminiscing, or she's thinking about her hardships, how hard it is. If there was a man around, the snake might have been killed before it got inside. The hardships of dealing with a wild bullock that rocks up, on your doorstep, and you could just, blow through its nostrils and blow the shanty down. Wayward swagmans and peddlers that were coming when they knew to come at dawn, at dusk, when the husbands were away droving. So she had to fight for survival. She had to fight for who she was. She had to provide for her family. And through this, she tells the stories, and her oldest son wakes up. So she relays the story through him. Now, I could have easily done something like that with my reimagining, as we like to call it, of the drover's wife. But of course, I wanted to sort of put my great-grandfather's story through, because he was a great man, done great things, had a harrowing life, but he survived, and he managed a great family of children that have had success in whatever they've chosen to do. So instead of the black snake, I made it a black man lying at the chopping block, except this guy isn't the bad guy. He's actually the hero. He's the good guy. And it's the white guys in the area. It's the oppression of the area, of the time, the social aspect.
You turned it all around then? Turned
it all around and spun it. But to the loyalists that came, there was the talk of Alligator the dog. We couldn't afford the dog in the production. The dog probably would have stole the show anyway. But you could hear the loyalists when they come, there's Alligator the dog. Then when she spoke in Henry's version, where she spoke about the peddler, I brought him to life. So when you brought these characters in, and they all happened to land at her place when there was horrific, I put a murder in the area. That was just fiction, made it up. You needed to have some sort of conflict. Troopers were coming. This black man ended on her doorstep. He was helping her in a time of need. She's heavily pregnant. She's about to give birth. She needs wood chopped, So he helps her, and she helps him, because he's a runaway black. He was stabbed in the back. He's got the collar. So we had drama galore, but it was just great to go and do history and find my grandfather's stories. And what I did was, he was given to a South African circus in 1891 that toured the east coast of Australia, and they left him destitute in Melbourne, and he was arrested for being destitute. And this minister saw him, 15-year-old, just about dead, no clothes, in the Pentridge jail, and he held a candle up, saw him, gave him a water and a bread, and said, I want to take this young fellow, because he actually ran a mission for wayward young blacks. So he took him out there. But my grandfather learned to read, write and play the tuba, and then sort of became a missionary, but he was doing it because he knew that if he followed these rules, he'll be able to get home, back up to North Queensland. So where my fiction comes is that they're around about Canberra, and my grandfather takes off and heads for the Snowy Mountains, because the mountains were the highways for the blackfellas. The Bogan Moth Festival was happening. Yeah. He hooks on that, hooks up with mob. Years pass, he marries in, and then he's on his way, just a blackfella in the wrong place at the wrong time, gets blamed for a murder, and they shifted him back to Melbourne, but he fights out, gets away from them, runs up into the mountains, but he's injured, and he comes down out, and that's when the drover's wife, he's looking for a feed, he's looking for shelter, and that's when the drover's wife, Henry Lawson, meets Leah Purcell's fictional grandfather now at this stage, and the story all came together, and taken from Henry, the swagman's there, the rogue peddler. But what I did was get the diaries. It was really interesting to get the diaries. And every time I did a Q&A, the first thing I'd say after I gave everyone a hug and said, is everyone all right, was everything that the non-Indigenous characters says in this play is almost word verbatim from diaries from your ancestors. I said, so don't debate me on that, mate, because that's your mob. Take it up with them. So it was a great way to start a conversation, and the best Q&A we had was with a group of young people. I wouldn't let anyone under 16 because it was a bit too harrowing, and I'm a nana now and I feel for those young people. And it was all art students and drama students, and it was the best Q&A. And one young fella said, I'm going to have to go and reassess what I know of Australian history. And I said, mate, I've done my job. I could walk away and be a happy woman, And it's those little things where you just want people to just think, consider, yes, it's a harrowing past. I'm not blaming anyone, but it's about knowing that stuff happened and we can all move forward.
It's the truth.
It's the truth.
Yeah. Leah, you're a Murray woman. You have language.
Yeah. Do
you have phrases or bits of language you like to use in certain circumstances that are really meaningful to you?
Yeah, every now and then. Like unfortunately, our language was taken and broken, so it's been through my research and asking my elders, for words, and so it's easy to sing. It's easy to sing in language, and I have little quotes that sometimes I write on people's, people asking for autographs or things that I sort of live by, or it's my prayer, I guess. I'm not religious based. I'm spiritual, so it's about my Indigenous spirituality.
It's kind of a benediction, then.
Yeah, and just things that get me through the day, and that empower me, or I feel connected to my culture.
Is there anything you can leave us with today?
Oh. Let me try.
I'm putting you on the spot here, I know.
You are. I'll sing a little song. Gosh, I haven't warmed up. No.
I wasn't expecting singing, actually. I was just expecting...
it's easy to sing.
Right.
I could say Ataringa Yira Bayami, and that is like Bayami is our spiritual father, and it's sort of like I hope he blesses you as he blesses me and gives me his teaching. Or I'll do a little bit of a song. I'll move back a little bit. But it's just about a song of coming together, and one day, it's a prayer for the world that hopefully we can get over our differences and come together. It's probably a long shot, but you got to have hope. It's called Marlo, One Day. Marlo, karbili, kayan kan pemenyangan yamba, ndarahe. Malo kabili kayan kan pemenyangan yamba ndarahe nale winangulul gelan yamanjinda winangol anamanjinda winangol aliele.
It was fabulous. Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you.
Podcast and broadcast. This is Conversations with Richard Fidler.
I spoke with Leah Purcell in 2018. Since we spoke, Leah has made a feature film based on her play The Drover's Wife. Leah played Molly Johnson, a lone bushwoman struggling to protect her family from the harshness of life in 1893 in the Snowy Mountains. Leah received an Order of Australia in 2021 for her contribution to the performing arts in Australia. This conversation was made on the lands of the Gadigal, Turrbal and Jagera peoples. Producer was Nicola Harrison. Executive producer was Carmel Rooney. I'm Richard Fidler. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to a podcast of Conversations with Richard Fidler. For more Conversations interviews, please go to the website abc.net.au/conversations.